today's talk actually is about how can we move from the reactive chasing of IOCs into a more proactive approach and understand how the bad guys are operating behind the scenes. So I'm going to start backwards. I'm going to propose some takeaways, and you need to hold me accountable. Will you learn these things at the end? And if not, then you'll have to kind of press me with questions. So the first one, we want to learn something about the business model of bulletproof hosting providers. I'll explain what that is. And then I'm going to propose a taxonomy for BPH operations. And then we're going to look into the bulletproof hosting providers behind the current mail spam campaigns that I'm sure a lot of us are chasing. And finally, I'm going to propose some repeatable techniques and signals that can help you track these BPH operations, as well as some current malware campaigns. Some of you know me, some of you don't. So I'm DLite on Twitter. I'm the head of security research at Cisco Umbrella, formerly OpenDNS. My background is network security, network traffic analysis, and then I got a PhD in graph algorithms at SMU, Dallas, hence Rick's kind of mentioned there. And then I've been in the US for like 15 years, and then at the bottom you have a hint on where I'm from originally. So to the left, that's like one of the finest generals in ancient history. He used elephants as a hint. And then the next two are two fine generals from World War II, and they fought one of the fiercest battles on my home country's soil. So you must have figured it out already. So here's like a typical day in a SOC life. Basically, you're collecting a lot of data, some of it useful, some of it not, from your internal network, your endpoints, firewalls, proxy, a variety of other devices, and then you collect a lot of feeds from external sources. Some of it you pay, some of it is open source, some of it through some ISACs, but then you're trying to make sense out of all of this, so you pump it into a SIM, or you build your own, and then you try to take advantage of a tip to help you enrich and correlate and make some more sense. And eventually, hopefully, you can have some actionable threat intel. Again, what is threat intel, to be honest? It's that insight and information post-analysis that can help you make some good decisions tied to your requirements and your needs. It's not like something off the shelf that you can get. You have to tie it to your own needs, and you have to kind of do some effort to get the right intel. So this talk is about how can we move up from the tactical intel, which is like chasing IOCs, pushing them into enforcement devices, try to get some further understanding and proactive insight into what's behind the scenes in all of these crimeware operations. And hopefully, maybe we can get some strategic insight that can help us in the long term in terms of investments, how can we grow our teams, what type of feeds or collaborations or partnerships we should do in the long term. So here it is. Let's learn about the enemy. And for that, I'm going to propose to describe like the threat intel production cycle we have in my research lab. So we start with the requirement of protecting customers. This is basically what everybody does. So we need to find like some high-fidelity IOCs, domains and IPs typically. We start with our worldwide collection system of recursive DNS resolvers, but also a variety of other big data sources. After that, you have to do processing. So you have to basically summarize this data, index it, and make it searchable so you can test hypotheses and ask questions and get answers quick. And that's how you can do analysis, whether it's machine-based or human-based, and kind of get deeper into the investigation you're carrying. Finally, you'll have to disseminate that to your customer, and he will have to give you feedback so you know if you're succeeding or if you're failing, and with that, you can adjust and adapt. And with our lab, actually, we've done a lot of work in the analysis phase where we find a lot of these threats with different signals. Now you ask me, okay, why are we talking about bulletproof hosting, criminal hosting infrastructures? It's because practically all of the threats we see nowadays, they have to use some sort of hosting. It's the fundamental technology that enables everything around there. Malware, phishing, dump shops, crimeware forums, you name it. And in fact, if I step back, and now I propose a way to break down the cybercrime ecosystem, and you realize that the offerings in the underground, they are broken into three classes. You have the goods. Those are your items you can consume right away. You can buy and use, like the dumps, the credentials, the PIIs. And then you have the products. These are your tools that allow you to infect organizations or individuals at scale. And then in the middle, you have like the core technologies that allow everything else to exist, your services, such as the ransomware as a service or the bulletproof hosting providers, which are the focus of the stock. hence the definition. What's a bulletproof hosting provider? Simply put, it's a criminal hosting company that will shield the criminal customers against abuse complaints and takedown operations. How do they do that? We'll see a few hints. Now, actually, I want to go back and describe the spectrum of hosting space. You will see that you have the good stuff to the left. These are your legit companies doing hosting. And then, unfortunately, a lot of them get abused because they don't have enough staff, because they have not defined a clear TOS, or because they're lax and they are in countries that allow this type of thing. And then, finally, you have the pure criminals. Those are the ones living in certain areas. They are leveraging certain technologies and certain regulations, and that allows us to thrive and to succeed. And that's kind of the topic of this presentation here. So for that, I want to propose a taxonomy that we can all use to classify bulletproof hosting. Here what I'm proposing is that we have a class that we call Botnet-based. I'm going to have an example, and then the other one is host-based, and I'm going to have an example as well. So before that, let me describe the business model. There's an interesting recipe we came up with after doing a few years of analysis, and we saw that the barrier of entry is quite low. You could spend less than $2,000 to come up with a dedicated bulletproof hosting operation. You basically have to register your business in an offshore country. I'll describe that. And then you have to acquire an autonomous system number, get some IP space, do peering relationships, and then you set up your website. You have to bring in customers, so you can have a public site, or you have just a presence in the underground forums, whether open or closed, or just stay private to a VIP clientele. And then you generate revenue. People will start using you. They will host traffic. They will send spam, generate bad stuff. And then if you're really bulletproof, you'll be able to handle abuse. But if not, you'll have to shut down your operation and move somewhere else. And then hopefully you can repeat the process, because the recipe is quite simple. I'm not saying it's trivial. I'm saying you have like some set steps that you can follow to succeed. So then now, how about the detection? What can we do about this? So these are some of the technical features we have used in the past few years to kind of identify these different infrastructures. So the first one is what we call a leaf ASN model. I'll describe that. The second one is you register your business in offshore countries. I'll describe that. And then usually they will use anonymous payment methods like the Bitcoin, the perfect money, and some of the new ones we see nowadays. Also, they will use small IP space just for flexibility and for low cost. And finally, obviously, if you follow the traffic hosted or generated out of this IP space, you'll see it's purely toxic and most of the time bad and criminal. For the outgoing traffic, it's usually like SSH brute forcing, DDoS attacks, sending spam, that type of thing. So how about the leaf stub ASN idea? So we came up with this concept at Black Hat 2014. The idea is that on the public internet, an organization needs to acquire an autonomous system number to identify their network. They have to have some IP space, and then they will do peering relationships and advertise their IP space. So then now they become visible to the global internet, and now they can route traffic in and out. So in this case, we can see that the relationship is directional. You have arrows pointing up, scenario and host limb. They happen to be having an upstream in Cerberus. And usually you'll have either upstream or downstreams. But the leaf is when you only have upstreams. You don't have anybody below you relying on you. Because if you have a relationship up, it means you have to advertise your IP space, and that person will have to advertise it for you. So if you don't have anybody below you, it means no one depends on you. Now, why is this interesting? It's because it offers you this like nomadic, flexible setup where you can just be a leaf, set up your operation, do your thing, and then if you want to move somewhere else, no one will be affected. You can just like go away and basically create another kind of link with another upstream provider, and it's as if nothing happened, in fact. This is not necessarily criminal, but we noticed it oftentimes with these criminal or suspicious hosting operations. The offshore countries, these are the ones we saw in the Panama Papers offshore leaks. They are not necessarily used by the BPH guys for tax evasion, but mainly for an extra layer of resistance, because in these countries, they are not forced to give away the private information of the customer, so law enforcement has no clue on who is behind the BPH operation. That's kind of the advantage here. In fact, we realized after further analysis that these bad guys, or these like BPH actors, they leverage like the best of three worlds. The operators will be mainly from Eastern Europe, like Ukraine and Russia. And then the servers will be using like the best connectivity in the world, North America and Europe. And finally, the business will be protected in offshore countries like the ones we saw. So you basically have an ideal recipe here, and no one practically can touch you. I'm not saying no one or impossible, because we had some successful takedown operations like the Avalanche and a few others, but you realize they last like a few years because it takes a lot of work and collaboration between law enforcement, countries, local agencies, security companies, private and sector and government. So it's not an easy task, but it's possible. Now let me talk about some major BPH operations. So let me start with the botnet-based ones. In this case, this is a known one. We've been tracking it for, I would say, 4 or 5 years. We call it the ZBot Fast Flux Proxy Network. Some others in the industry call it Fluxy or Dark Cloud. It's typically around 20 to 30 to 40,000 compromised residential machines, typically Wi-Fi access points and routers in mainly Ukraine and Russia. And they are used as a CDN or reverse proxy infrastructure for criminals. The idea is that you come to the actor, you have a site you want to protect. It could be a phishing site, a malware C2, a ransomware payment site, a dump shop, a criminal forum, and then you tell the guy for a few $100s, hey, I want to protect the origin IP of my server, and be like, okay, give me the domain. I'm going to change the name server setup of your domain and make it point to fast flux IPs from the botnet. So then everybody who resolves the domain will only see fast flux IPs, but then those bots controlled by the actor, they will have like a redirection via Nginx usually to the origin IP server, and then back and forth you have traffic. So it's like a criminal, Cloudflare or Akamai in a sense. And this guy has been very successful. Currently, he's powering the Gozi ISFB bank in Trojan, and in the past, he's done practically everything under the sun. Now, the other model, or the other class, is the host-based. So we saw an example where it was mainly botnet-based, like compromised people's machines. Now it's host-based, meaning he will either have his own ASN infrastructure, or he will lease servers and VPSs from third-party companies, or he will combine both. And these are like examples of known hosters that are rogue or criminal that are using the host-based model. You can take a picture, or you can ask me later for these examples to study. Now let's talk about one of the most prominent guys in the host-based BPH space. This guy is named Alex. In fact, this is a very interesting and close relationship with Intel 471. So they track the actor-centric intelligence. They are the experts in the field in that. From our side, we are like the worldwide telemetry guys. So we are able to track this thing all over the place and kind of pinpoint where they are and what they are doing. So this guy actually now is powering practically everything you see, the mail spam campaigns, the phishing, the dump shops, anything you name it. And he's been successful since 2016. In fact, all of the activity that we see nowadays, they have used this guy at least once or a few times. And he has a presence in China, but he's a Russian-speaking guy. The other interesting thing is that he also abuses third-party cloud services, such as Amazon and Google Cloud, although they have cleaned up their act recently. And now he's focused mainly on European hosting companies, like in Russia, France, Netherlands, and a few other countries. This is the interesting slide I like here, which is the one we came up with by studying his dedicated internet infrastructure. So the guy owns and operates 3 ASNs of his own, the 3 ones in gray. In fact, they have that leaf chain ASN structure I described earlier because they have no downstreams. They kind of link to each other, the ones to the left. And then they share some handles with another ASN to the right. And that's the Alexander Volosovic name that we used in like the way we called him. In fact, that's his name, and then he has another handle in the underground. And what's interesting is that the chain there of those 2 to the left, they can sever the relationship with Obit, which is a typical hosting company in Russia, and kind of move somewhere else like nothing happened. I'm not saying they do it like easily, but then that's the setup I described earlier that makes it very flexible. And finally, the guy in gray, to the right, that one is sharing some credentials that appeared in the Panama Papers, like the address in Seychelles. That one, if you look it up, it's the same with maybe tens or hundreds of companies that are in the Panama Papers. So They use like some front companies to protect their identity, some from tax evasion and some for bulletproof hosting operations. So the funny thing is that you can see that I would say different worlds will overlap for the same, I would say, evasion and money laundering purposes. Now, let me go with a use case here, which is one of the most prominent mail spam campaigns right now are leveraging the Alex infrastructure. And I'm going to describe those signals and features I described earlier to track this type of malware campaign. So your typical mail spam campaign infection chain looks like something like this. So you have a phishing email or like a few phishing emails sent in large amounts to potential victims. In this case, they spoof performanceair.com. That's a legit domain, but it has been made look like it's the one who is sending the spam emails. And they're trying to lure you into thinking it's a Delta Airlines like invoice. So you have to click on a link to download whatever. The next step is that when you open up the body of the email, you'll have some phishing URLs that you have to click on if you make the mistake. And those will go and drop a malicious Word document who will bring in handsetter dropper. It's not the malware itself, because the handsetter dropper will call out to its own C2s, which are in step 4. And then the handsetter dropper will now call out to its own C2s, who will bring the actual banking Trojan. In this case, it's been Zloader, Pony, Evil Pony, and then Panda Banker. And finally, those Trojans, they will call out to their own C2s in step 5. And now they bring in, like extra modules for infection. They will exfiltrate data, or they will just announce their existence. So step 6 can vary depending on the purpose of the malware being dropped in step 4. This is your infection chain. Now, how can we track it with our worldwide signals intelligence? We're going to see. This is how the email looks like when you just receive it in your spam trap or email mailbox. Now, let me start with the signal analysis here. So this is from our global telemetry. This is I would say, an interface we use for research, but it's also offered for our customers for their own purpose. But the point is, the spike in traffic to performance air, remember, that's the spoofed sender domain. It's legit. They just made it look like it's the one sending the spam. But then you see a 50K spike in queries, DNS queries, from all over the world. Those clients querying this domain, they could have been spam traps, email appliances, mail servers. They could have been the potential mail servers of the victim. So it varies. But the point is here, we can get an idea about the volume of the attack. So you have 50K queries that might give you the extent of this campaign. And this is done daily. So that was the first step. How about the second step? Can we have some signals intelligence around it? In fact, we do. So we can see that some of those URLs in the body of the email, they also have spikes. But the spikes are lower. They're around 1,000 to 1,200 DNS queries. So here it tells you how the funnel tightens, but then you now become more focused in your potential infections. Because by the time you clicked on the link, you're about to be infected. Potentially it's a spam trap or an email appliance, so there's no real victim. But then if it happens to be a real person who clicked, then you got an idea about how many potential victims were infected. Now, think about it also is that what you should think about as well is that you have 6 URLs per day, per mail spam daily campaign. So you multiply that by the volume, and that tells you around 1,200 times 6 or 7. That's around the number of potential queries to that domain that might lead to infections. In fact, another interesting, I would say, signal is that not only the volume of the spike is interesting, it's also the duration. So when we zoom in, or zoom out, sorry, whatever the right term is, you'll realize the spike will last for a few hours. It's 7 hours. It's not just one hit of a button and then everything happens. So you basically have potentially victims who will spend 7 hours to get into the flow of this infection chain. And then if you calculate the area under the curve, you can come up with a potential number of how many infections this campaign is yielding. Now, let's do our typical passive DNS exercise that everybody likes. I'm going to look into one of the IPs of the phishing URL on the 30th of August. That IP, 5214, fun fact, it's on Amazon. It's one of the IPs from Alex. Remember, he was abusing Google Cloud and AWS. Now, this was like several months ago. This IP is not used anymore. It has been cleaned up by Amazon. But then back then in the summer, this was being leveraged by Alex and being offered for his Handsetter actors. Basically, you have Alex operating on his own. He's catering to a variety of customers, and the Handsetter gang were using him for their first stage infection. Now, if I dig deeper into the passive DNS, I'll see that that IP is hosting like a lot of other domains. In fact, a lot of them are also spiking. I'll took one of them, Hey Mama Radio. That guy is also spiking at the same volume. Remember the 1,200 queries of the first one? Now I pivoted from the IP, and now I get a domain with the same signals intelligence or signals feature. That's the interesting fact. So now I can tie in together a few domains via the IP that are part of the same, I would say, spike malspam campaign. Now, an interesting fact here about the passive DNS is that not only should you look at the IPs themselves, but also look at the flux and who do they belong to, and tie that with other, I would say, insights. So in this case, that domain, the top one, the phishing URL, is in fact a compromised GoDaddy domain. So the IPs surrounded by green, those are IPs from the GoDaddy IP space. So initially, on the 29th of August, it was a GoDaddy legit IP. Sorry, yeah, the domain was hosted on a GoDaddy legit IP. And then all of a sudden, on the 29th of August, it switched to an IP that is 4774. And that lasted for like the next 6 days. So all of the IPs in red, those are IPs under the Alex bulletproof hosting infrastructure. So this is kind of the point here. The malspam campaigns are leveraging Alex infrastructure by weaponizing formerly legit domains, switching them into the new criminal IPs, and then using them. As we saw, they spike because you had a lot of victims going to them. And finally, they de-weaponize them and bring them back to the GoDaddy previous space. That's another interesting signal we need to look for. Now, the classical approach, who is? Everyone can do it. I look into the registrant email. That one happens to be using GoDaddy. So we can see here it's a compromised registrant. It's not like a dedicated thing that was registered in August of 2017. We confirm that because the domains under that registrant, they were not malicious before. But once the account got popped by the actors, or it got acquired by the actors, it's not necessarily the same people, they weaponized all of those domains, and now they use them in similar campaigns or like campaigns of the same day. In fact, if we pick one of those, the .info, we can see that it also has a spike, same volume, 1,200 queries. So you can see here I found like 3 different domains from different avenues that had the exact same like signal feature here. Another interesting feature we have that we use in our research and analysis is what we call like related domains or co-occurrences concept. The idea is that we build like this internal large-scale graph where we take all of the domains queried by the same IPs during a short time period. It's almost like locality and time based on who queries those domains. And with that, you can build a very interesting graph, the co-occurrence graph, which will tie domains that are shared between the same infected machines, like DGAs typically, or like machines following like the infection chain. So usually you'll see the compromised site leading with the iframe injection, leading to the exploit kit landing page to maybe the C2 domain. And oftentimes it's also useful for tracking people who browse the same topics. Like crimeware forums, you'll see them co-occurring all together. Jabber servers, they will co-occur together. VPN, proxy, SOC servers, they will also co-occur together because the customers who go there, they will tend to have like the same topics or interests altogether. Now in this case, the phishing URL that we see here at the top, that one co-occurs with the performance error. Remember, performance error was the spoofed sender. It was stage 1 in the infection chain. The phishing URL is stage 2. And then the bottom ones, the 3 there, they are also stage 2. Those are like phishing URLs who are dropping the Handsetter malware. So you can see here with the co-occurrences now, you can also recreate the infection chain somewhat because you have stage 1 co-occurring with stage 2, and also some other guys, some other domains from the stage 2 of the same campaign or a campaign from a following day. That's kind of the interesting thing here. Now, you might tell me, okay, how can I do this on my own? If you have like your large DNS collection infrastructure, you can try to create this sort of analysis. Like you'll have to collect the data, you'll have to process it, create like the right data structures, use the right technology, and then now maybe you can come up with this type of analysis. So these are like some recipes that you might be able to reproduce, and some of them might require maybe, use like some third party or whatnot. But I guess the takeaway is that a lot of these things are worth looking at because they give you a lot of insight beyond just like the domains and IPs and running around and trying to push them and block them and all of that stuff, So I guess one of the final slides is an interesting kind of recap on the exploration graph I described. And then I can go over it in slow-mo if you have questions later. So we started with stage 1, and then we were able to find the related domains. And then we found whois helped us find some more malicious domains. We looked into the hosting IP, which happened to be on Alex that we described earlier. And then from that hosting IP, we found domains that happened to resolve to other IPs under the Alex infrastructure. And then I could have also looked into the hashes that are tied to that malicious domain. I didn't show it. But then if you look into the network trace, you can also find some more C2s that are part of this entire infection chain. So we found it very useful for us to kind of map out the exploration kind of paths we have, because that kind of gives you a visual perspective of how things are operating. You could do this with some visual tools, or you can just draw it on the board. And we found that very powerful. Now, we do this with pencil and paper, but then oftentimes if you have the expertise and technology, you can build the systems who will do this at scale. That's kind of the fun part. How can you transfer your human insight into something scalable and repeatable? I think that's one of the lessons we can learn from this conference, which I found very exciting, is that can we make all of this knowledge we have here into something scalable and repeatable so we can save time? So finally, one of my favorite slides is that it's a summary of the TTPs across mal spam campaigns covering a few months. I would say 6 or 7 months. I just put 2 here for space. But then we see that the first stage, which is the spoofed sender URL, the spoofed sender email, they happen to be using legit, unfortunately innocent domains, but those happen to have a very distinct spike volume. It's around 50 or 60K. Whereas the phishing URLs in the body of the email, they happen to have that spike around 1,200, no more. But then the other cool thing about it is that all of the phishing URLs, like the stage 2 in the infection, are using Alex. They never kind of divert from that. Why? Because Alex happens to be one of the most successful, reliable, fault-tolerant, etc., bulletproof hosting infrastructures we see nowadays in the ecosystem of cybercrime. And the actors behind Hanseater, they chose, for practicality, to use him because they were like, OK, let's guarantee the best kind of infection rate we can get by using the best guy very early in our infection chain, and the rest we don't care. In fact, the next C2s, they are all using a variety of small-time BPH and abused hosters in European countries and Russia and Ukraine especially. So this kind of shows you how, like we saw earlier with the talk about AlphaBay, where it's a very opportunistic ecosystem. They will try to use the best expertise from different kind of groups, and the goal is to basically make make money and be the most successful in the cybercrime ecosystem. So I know I had a lot of material. I went a little bit fast, but then if you want to get more details, I invite you to check some of our previous talks. So we had a few talks at Black Hat 2014, 2016, 2017, DEF CON, Virus Bulletin, you name it. You can take a picture, or you can get those from the slides. But if not, then I'll be more than happy to talk offline about any questions. So some acknowledgments, some good friends helped out with a few things. And thank you again. Appreciate it.